Hi, this is going to be your tips and tricks video in under 5 minutes, and yes, I am timing it. Doing electronic repair often involves soldering and desoldering, and if you have a lot of desoldering to do and you're working on a board like this is an intercom board for a NuTone intercom, and let's say for instance you have to remove this integrated circuit package right here. This is a dip package. It's a dual inline pin package. There are 14 solder joints, 7 on each side, that you have to desolder to remove the IC. That's a lot for people to do if you don't do this on a regular basis. Now this is a consumer quality, mass-produced board. Consumer quality is a nice way to say it's cheap. You have to be careful and not overheat the pads when you remove the solder, taking into account that you have to heat them again to resolder in the new IC. These type of boards are all wave soldered, which means they go through an automated process to do the soldering. The amount of solder and the quality of the wave soldering on the board varies a lot from product to product because again, it's consumer, so it's cheap. A good tip when you have to desolder, especially something like this where there's a lot of pins, is the solder on the board that's here already may be somewhat dry. There's not a lot of solder, there's not a lot of flux in it, and it would be hard to reheat and then suck up off the board in some way to remove the IC. So the tip is, what you do is you take a little bit of new solder and you very carefully go across and you resolder each joint. Now that may seem counterintuitive to you because you want to remove the IC, but here we are adding new solder to the joints. The advantage to doing this is your new solder has more flux in it, so it flows easier. And also, if you have a fairly new product, if something that was made in the last 8 or 10 years, perhaps it may have been made or assembled with lead-free solder, and lead-free solder does not flow and is much harder to deal with. I don't use lead-free solder here because most of the equipment I work on has combination solder, which is tin and lead, and I don't really need to make my life harder than it already is. So I go through and I touch each of the 14 joints up. I'm going to turn the board a little bit so it's facing the right way for me. These are the connections that we're working on. And then instead of using my super expensive vacuum desoldering tool like that, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to use some solder wick, which I'll show you at the very end. So I took the solder wick, I put a little bit of flux on it. I have some Kester 186 flux in a bottle. I'll show you that at the end also. I put a little bit of flux on the desoldering braid to make sure it flows well, and all you have to do, put the braid up against the joint, apply the heat from the soldering iron, and the new solder and the old solder will flow into the braid. And I hope you're keeping track of the time because I'm actually looking at what I'm doing. That was one side, that was 7 joints. And now we're going back up the second side. And when you do this, ow, the soldering braid gets hot. Okay, 3 more to go. 1, 2, 3. I think we got it all. This one needs a little touch up over here. What I was saying was when I'm doing this, I'm actually looking at what I'm doing. I'm focusing in on desoldering. If you look here now, you'll see all 14 pins have been desoldered, and you can actually, I think, see the little holes where the legs come through that were covered up by solder before. All right, gotta hurry, coming up on 5 minutes. See, look, I picked the board up to flip it over to show you. This is where the IC was before, right here where my finger is pointing, and look what we have on the bench. We have the IC, it simply fell off the board altogether. So when you do this, your soldering braid fills up with solder, as you can see there. This is the kind of braid I use. It's MG chemical braid, like that. And here's my Kester 186 flux. That's all.